So a common one, for instance, is that when women have been married for a certain time, any touch from the man is going to make them go frigid, because they associate touch with, now I'm going to have to open my legs and get fucked. And I don't want it, because it's not the way that I want it, and it's not good for my body. So kind of the association of touch, any touch becomes taking the body into a closed place where you can't, the heart just can't open anymore. That's an example. So associations can play a very, very big role in our ability to be present.
Can you give an example from a male example?
Yeah, I'll give you an example from, this is not so much trauma, but still there was a little bit of trauma for one of my clients. His very first experience with a girlfriend, which was the thing of, here she comes, and you know, he comes from a conservative community, but gee, his heart is pounding and his penis is erect, and she's coming closer, and she clearly wants him to touch her, and he's kind of touching her, and he's starting to go up her bum, and he's starting to feel the energy move in her, and her body's starting to shake, and now he's feeling her breast, and all of this is happening, and at some point it just gets too much for him. It's like, this is wrong, I shouldn't be doing this, and he shuts it down. And for the rest of his life, the fantasy sits there. Every time he's with a woman, it's like, you know, like he's thinking about that girl. And like how that was. So then, of course, what I do with him is I take myself into the role of the 16-year-old. And I dress like the 16-year-old, and I approach him like that. And I let him touch me like that. And this thing happens in his body, this huge thing, this energy kind of overload almost of, oh my God, and just the permission, and me, of course, encouraging him to just go deeper into that association and live it. And because he's now got the opportunity, and we took it very far, further than he would have been able to take it as a 16-year-old. So with that dissolves the association with sex being about, basically for him, about taking away the innocence of a young girl. Because what I gave him is, here I am in the fullness of my purity, and I want to be with you. And can you receive that? Because that is how you honor my purity, is by receiving me. So with that, the association dissolves, and he can be with his lovers in a way that he doesn't need that association to trigger his erotic response. Does that make sense? Okay, now I want to talk a bit more about what do we do to help release the trauma in the body, the sexual trauma, or the whatever memory there is. And I've already started to talk about it. I've given you some examples. One of the main things I want to talk about is what happens in the nervous system when there's a trauma response. And it's quite simple. You see it in animals. It's like this. Here comes the buck. The buck is running at full speed because he can smell the lion is coming. But the buck is unlucky. The lion catches him. He gets caught by the throat. What immediately happens in the buck's body is that all energy goes to the central organs. The body freezes and it goes cold. It imitates death. It kind of wants to tell the predator, I'm already dead. You don't have to go any further to kill me. So it goes into shock, into fight and flight response, basically, and it freezes up. If the buck is lucky enough that the lion gets distracted and runs away, say a truck comes by or something, the buck will stay in this frozen position for a while until it feels that the lion is now gone. Then it will slowly get up and it will start to shake from the tail all the way to the head. The whole body will start to shake. It will shake out the legs. And then it will take a breath. And then it will walk away like nothing ever happened. Complete release of the trauma. So what actually happened there was that here comes the threat. The body kicks into sympathetic nervous system, fight and flight response, which is what in the West we most of the time live in. We are always running to survive. We need to get to the next meeting. We need to conquer the next thing. We need to get through the traffic. We're always in survival mode in some other way. So our sympathetic nervous systems are kind of habitually overloaded. But now, if you get into a threatening situation, into a trauma, that is what happens to our bodies. Say, for instance, the child now, say, for instance, with the not having the breast anymore, suddenly there's no breast anymore. The little baby's body registers stress, shock. I'm not going to survive. I'm not going to make this. I'm going to die. And so the body goes into shock, into a contraction. And you can imagine this in a situation that's more sexual, more overtly sexual. The kind of contraction, fight and flight reaction that happens in the body when something occurs that wasn't asked for. I'll give you an example, which I think is quite a common one. Of my clients had an older brother who she was very fond of, and she always wanted to be his friend and the friend of his friends. And one day the older brother and his friends come into her room and they start to be sexual with her. And she's little, she's like 5 years old. And she goes into shock and trauma because she doesn't want this, but at the same time she really wants to please her brother and the friends. So now she's allowing this. And the trauma in her body, that the main trauma that remains, is that she caused this because she actually wanted their friendship. So it was her that caused it. So years later, many, many years later, something happens in her marriage, and suddenly the shock is back, the trauma is back. And what happens in her body is it freezes up, the whole body goes cold, it goes into contraction. And this happens to a greater or a lesser degree. You know, you're not necessarily going to see the person go completely frozen up like the buck. But let's just check. Have any of you experienced this in your life? Can you think of a moment where you felt your body go cold? Like it suddenly goes cold and rigid? Hey?
When ayahuasca, went through a death experience in ayahuasca and the body went completely cold.
Right. Any of you remember? It's not necessarily a sexual thing, but if you can think of a moment where you had a shock.
I used to have like icy sensations in my hands and feet.
Yes.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
Not lately, but it's definitely, yeah. I know the cold thing makes sense.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in my clients as well.
Yeah. It gets felt in the hands and the feet very much, that it goes cold and goes frozen. Anybody else experience that? A sudden a contraction, a stiffness, so the body doesn't want to move. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the sympathetic nervous system kicking in and basically protecting the body. It's taking the energy to the core organs. The brain is giving the message to the body. There's a life threat here. Conserve your energy. So the body goes frozen up. And a lot of people live their lives in a frozen up state. They don't ever really unfreeze. They kind of continuously, habitually frozen.
I've heard it called the fight, flight, or freeze reaction.
Yes. Maybe that's a better description of it.
Yeah, I mean, other sort of just us, our culture being in that trauma all the time.
Yeah.
If you ever go into a court of law in this country, for sure, probably any court of law anywhere in the world, even if you're not very good with your nose, you will smell the fear. And in the corporate world, you know, all those suits that keep someone's air contained to their body, and all these spray-on, seal the pores of your skin kind of antiperspirants and things like that, it's just so that people don't know the truth, that this is like an abattoir. This is a shocking, scary, everyone's in fear and terror place.